We relegated Man City, and now we're going to go 5 years into the future to find out what happens after Man City gets relegated. So last week we did a video where we essentially just reloaded until Man City got relegated, and we finally got Man City relegated. And you guys wanted to see the implications to that relegation. So again, we're going to go season by season, 5 years into the future to find out what happens. There are a few main questions that we're going to have. First and foremost, can City get back into the Prem and can they become one of the best teams in the world? Or can they at least get back to the place that they were before we reloaded until they got relegated? And then, of course, what is their head coaching situation and what is their team going to look like? Thomas Tuchel is currently the head coach. We'll see if he stays on. And looking at the playing squad, obviously this team is still the current Man City team from real life. But looking at players, their most important players here, will Erling Haaland stick around? Will Bernardo Silva stick around? Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne, so on and so forth. Will these players leave to go to clubs who are still in the Prem or in Saudi Arabia? And if they do leave, will Man City be able to rebuild? And honestly, looking at the squad, my initial hypothesis is they're going to have no troubles in the Sky Bet Championship. I think after one season, we're going to see them in the Prem pretty quickly. But after that, it's going to depend on how many players they're able to keep and if anyone moves on to other Champions League clubs. It'll be interesting to see once they're back in the Prem, whether they're able to become one of the best sides again or whether they end up being kind of a mid-table, above mid-table team. But I don't see them losing all of these players, so I still think they're going to be pretty good. And of course, they're still one of the richest teams in the world. And if they sell these players, they're only going to bring in more money. They're still going to have the parachute payments. If they sell someone like Haaland, that's not going to be for cheap. So they'll still be able to bring in players, but the AI isn't good at transfers, so maybe they won't be able to rebuild as good of a team as they currently have. But anyways, we're going to move forward. Let's go season by season and see what happens. So let's start off with season one. Man City will be in the Sky Bet Championship. Let's see how they do. And at the conclusion of our first season, unsurprisingly, Man City have won the Sky Bet Championship and they will be back in the EPL. But the big surprise here, Stoke. Do you guys see this? Stoke have made the Europa Conference League. We got to see what's up with that before we get to City. They won the Carabao Cup. That's amazing. So Stoke will be in the championship, but they're also going to be in Europe next season. That's crazy. But Man City, back to the actual topic of the video. Man City have been promoted by winning the Sky Bet Championship. 41 wins, 3 draws. Maybe the surprising thing is that they even had 2 losses at all. They lost to Luton away. Luton finished second, and Preston. And Preston finished in 16th. That would be very disappointing for them. But they were absolutely dominant. How did they do during the course of this? They're in the FA Cup final too. And they're in the Club World Championship because they won the Champions League. Next season we'll have to see how they did in the FA Cup. But looking through, I mean, they were amazing. I mean, they lost in the Carabao Cup 4th round, but they didn't lose a game in the championship until December. And they only had 1 draw up to that point. And then, I mean, they they were phenomenal. I mean, that's not surprising. They beat Arsenal. Alfonso, what is going on? Cody Gakpo and Alfonso. We're going to have to look at the squad. How are they bringing in these players in the championship? But they beat Arsenal in the quarterfinal. They beat Brighton in the semis, and now they're in the FA Cup final. They're probably going to win it. Once we go forward to the next season, I'll see if they won the FA Cup. We'll know that pretty quickly. But looking at transfers in and transfers out, starting off with transfers out, they sold a lot of players. So looking through here, Phil Foden was sold for 77 million to Newcastle. Haaland was sold to PSG for 94 million. Bernardo Silva went to Saudi Arabia. Grealish went to Tottenham. Akanji went to Real Madrid. Doku went to Brighton. De Bruyne went to Liverpool. Kyoto went to Chelsea. Maxime Perron, Leicester, he's more of a youngster. Backup goalkeeper Ortega going to Stuttgart. But Kyle Walker went to Barcelona. Ilkay Gundogan went to Lazio. So a lot of big sales there, but they brought in 452 million pounds worth of players. Foden, Haaland, Silva, Grealish, and De Bruyne being the big sales. So they lost some star players. But it's unbelievable here to see who they brought in. How in the Sky Bet Championship did they bring in Alphonso Davies, Joshua Kimmich, and Marco Asensio, and Cody Gakpo, and Danielle Malen? I mean, they've brought in world class. I mean, Alphonso Davies is arguably the best left back in the world, and they brought him into the second tier of England. Joshua Kimmich is one of the best midfielders in the world. They brought him into the second tier of England. Marco Asensio has multiple Champions League titles, and in the game, he's amazing. And again, they brought him to the second tier of England. Cody Gakpo has left Liverpool. I mean, was this like part of the De Bruyne deal? Danielle Malen. I mean, how did they bring in these players? They even brought in Vanderson from AS Monaco. He's pretty solid. Miguel Gutierrez from Girona. I mean, that's a sister club. Rooney Bargi. They signed Rooney Bargi, who I don't think he's as good in the game as he is in real life. Looking at him here, he's pretty mid. But I mean, this is unbelievable. Arkin Kochu as well. I mean, shout out to the AI because they've brought in phenomenal players on the end in the Sky Bet Championship. But I think this just goes to show in game how important reputation is. Because even though City are in the second division of England, they still have a higher reputation than a lot of other clubs. I mean, even in the Prem. So they were able to bring in all of these players. This just goes to show how important reputation is in Football Manager. And looking at their squad, this is about how they would have played. So they still had some great players. Probably Alphonso Davies would have moved in here. But I mean, they still, Diaz, Ake, I mean, they still have great players. I don't see Ederson. Ederson would have played as well. They still got Rodri, Josko Vardiol, Rico Lewis. Yeah, I mean, their team is amazing. Their team is still fantastic. It's no wonder they had no trouble getting out of the championship. Well, after season one, City are back in the Prem. The real question is, will they be able to bounce back? Honestly, their team is amazing. I wouldn't even be surprised if they win the Prem next year. Well, City did not win the Prem, but they still finished third. And they are once again a Champions League club. They're clearly not as good as they were prior to us relegating them. I mean, obviously losing someone like Erling Haaland is a big deal. Chelsea actually running away with the league, all things considered. But at this point, City they're back to being a Champions League club. I mean, this is essentially par for the course for them. I will say, though, looking at the transfer history, I don't think it's as good as previously we've seen. Ruben Neves coming in, I mean, he's good, but he's certainly not great. They brought in Rafa Leao. Actually, Rafa Leao is a pretty world-class signing. Cameron Carter-Vickers, though, I mean, that's pretty mid. Kenan Yildiz is good, but I don't think he's world-class necessarily in Football Manager. And they brought in Beraldo, who's a mid-table type player at best. So I don't think their transfers have been as good. Maybe they're missing out on those truly world-class signings. But looking at who they got rid of, John Stones and Nathan Ake are probably the big ones, but otherwise they've still kept most of their players. Looking at the team, I mean, they still have Joshua Kimmich, who's asking to leave. He's lost trust in the head coach. Oh, who's their head coach now? Sorry, I forgot to look at that. Let's look at head coaches. It is still Thomas Tuchel. But they still have, I mean, their team's amazing. They have this guy here, Lois Openda. Actually, don't know. I guess he plays for Leipzig in real life. He's pretty good. Great pace, great acceleration, good finishing. I mean, they still have a really good team. I can't believe they've signed Cody Gakpo and Alphonso Davies and Joshua Kimmich. That's still just blowing my mind. Sure enough, last season, they won the FA Cup final. And looking at how they did in the Club World Championship, they lost in the semifinal to Juventus, so they can't win it all. They won the Community Shield still. They definitely weren't as good in the Prem as maybe we've seen previously. I mean, losses to Crystal Palace and Spurs definitely shows they aren't as good. A little bit of a rough December as well. However, looking at how things went, they won the Carabao Cup. I mean, they've won the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. They've won the same number of trophies that Eric Ten Hag won during his tenure, and Man City were relegated. Looking forward, they were knocked out of the Europa League though to Sporting. That would be the big disappointment for City this season. That they were knocked out by Sporting. That is a big surprise. That is the one that really surprises me. But they still had a successful season. They finished in third. They've won a Carabao Cup. They've won an FA Cup. They've won a Community Shield. They made the semifinal of the Club World Championships. So at this point, they have truly bounced back. And in season three, City were a Champions League club once again, finishing in fourth. So they are well and truly back. They're a top four side. What this tells me is that relegating Man City in one season isn't enough to essentially take down the club. Like there's so many more structural things for a club in real life as well, but also in Football Manager, things like reputation, training and youth facilities, how much money the club has. All of these things mean that Man City were able to bounce back very quickly. Relegating Man City isn't enough. If you truly wanted to destroy the club, you would need to implement systemic failures that lead to a lower reputation, that destroy their finances and ruin their facilities. And that would actually lead Man City to drop down the divisions. But relegating Man City isn't enough. They are still a phenomenal club with a phenomenal squad who are clearly and easily back in the top four. Looking at their schedule, Thomas Tuchel is still there. They were knocked out in the Champions League quarterfinal. They had a very rough end of the season. Looking at things are there, very difficult end to the season. But looking at how they did, not a great beginning of the season either. Losing to Southampton away is certainly not what they would have wanted. But they picked things back up. They did well in the Champions League phase. Scrolling down here, they won another Carabao Cup. They've won one trophy every season since being relegated. Carabao Cup, FA Cup, Carabao Cup. They've literally won a trophy every single year. They haven't won the big ones. They haven't won the Prem, the Champions League, or the Europa League, but they're still doing phenomenal. But perhaps the most interesting thing is they didn't bring in any transfers. No, they didn't bring in any transfers this season. They must have spent so much money, maybe because of financial fair play, because they did get relegated, so they didn't bring in as much money. So it could be because of financial fair play. They did sell Mateus Nunes to Chelsea for 50 million and sold Daniel Mullen for 12.5 million to Brentford. And looking at their squad now, yeah, they didn't sign anyone, so it's exactly the same. They got this guy Bailey Oswell, who is a regen from their academy who looks amazing. I don't know if he's going to play striker or mid, but he's great at both. A little bit slow, but great jumping reach, a good holy trinity, great off the ball. What a player they've brought. And this is an example. They can still bring in these world-class players through their youth academy, and everything is fine. Moving quickly through season 4, once again, City have finished 4th. They are in the Champions League spots again. I mean, relegating them clearly did enough to make them not as good because they're not winning the Prem like they were before, like with Holland and De Bruyne. They're not dominating and winning the Prem, but they're still making the Champions League. They're still one of the top 4 clubs in England. So, they do have a new head coach though. Craig Mudd is their head coach. He's the interim. Was Thomas Tuchel fired? Looking at the head coaches, he was fired, so they probably needed to win. My guess is that they needed to win the Prem, and they did not do that. But looking at their schedule here, Champions League round of 16 again. The relegating them has done enough to make them not as good of a squad. Like, they're not winning, they're not making Champions League finals, things like that. But looking how they did, they finally lost in the Carabao Cup. I think, they're not going to win. They had a very rough November. Wow, that is a terrible November. And they kind of turned things around. But this year, no trophy. Finally, we got a year where City didn't win a trophy. no Premier Division, no FA Cup, no Carabao Cup, and they only brought in £36 million worth of transfers. Most of the money spent on Shaquille Van Persie, who I believe is Robin Van Persie's son, and he's very good. Wow, he's good. Good jumping reach, good heading, good Holy Trinity. He's a very solid young forward. I think that's a great signing. They didn't sell many players either. I mean, their squad, the interesting thing is their squad is essentially the same. They spent all of their money in the championship and haven't really revamped the squad since then. If anything, like it's almost confusing because they really made their squad good in the championship, and once they got into the Prem, I feel like they haven't capitalized on it. This is where the AI might not be as good at developing teams, but I think this is why they're not as good of a squad like we're seeing now. They have an aging squad. I mean, Ederson, Diaz, Rodri, and Kimmich, they're all pretty old. So yeah, I would definitely say squad building has been an issue for City once they've been back in the Prem. They had oddly had better squad building in the championship. But 4 seasons in, they're still a Champions League club. Let's go one more season. Well, fifth and final season, and interestingly, City did miss out on the Champions League places. So relegating them did have an effect. Maybe not as big of an effect as it would have been funny to see for the video, but it did have an effect. They immediately became one of the better clubs in England, but they weren't able to squad build as well as we have previously seen City do. And because of that, they haven't been an elite club. I mean, they've almost been like Spurs when Pochettino was there. Like, pretty good. They did win a few trophies, though. That's very unlike Spurs. But, I mean, I think the highest they finished was third, and then they were fourth, and now they've dropped down to fifth. So, they're good, but they're okay for their level. Looking to see how they did this season. Again, not the greatest start to the season in the world. Not super well in the Champions League phase. And were they knocked out? No, they made the round of 16 again. This time they did beat Dortmund. So they made the quarterfinals, which I think is the furthest they've made, but they were knocked out to Inter Milan. I think that would be disappointing for them. They lost in the FA Cup semifinal, but they won. I mean, they've just won the Carabao Cup 3 times in 5 seasons, I think it is. They just love the Carabao Cup. Well, City won 4 trophies in 5 years after being relegated. They never won the big ones, but 3 Carabao Cups and an FA Cup and an FA Cup in the championship. That's wild. Interestingly, this year they brought in 178 mil worth of players. They did sell 142 mil. They sold Rafael Leao. That's a big sale, actually. I'm a little surprised about that one. Kimmich, though, was sold to Saudi Arabia. Not surprised there. Vanderson sold for big money, not surprised there. The players they brought in, Johan Duborg, who is a regen, he's not very good. This is what I mean about the AI, not really bringing in very good players. I don't think he's a good signing. Warren Zaire-Emery is a good signing, but I don't know if he's as good in game, maybe as he might even get in real life. He's pretty mid right now. I can see why they weren't challenging for the title. Lucas Roman, again, I don't think he's world class. They weren't bringing in world class players. Luka Netz here is pretty mid. The squad building wasn't very good. I think that is the downfall of City in this save, is that the squad building, interestingly, the squad building after they got back into the Prem, they got relegated, did a great job of bringing in players who were surprisingly good. They got into the Prem and did not do a good job of getting better. If anything, they've gotten worse. This guy's amazing, though. The player they did not sign, the player that came through their academy, Bailey Oswell. Wow, what a player. Professional personality, world class. I would not be playing this guy as a midfielder. He would be an amazing striker. And they are not playing him as a midfielder. He should be a 25 goal a season striker. I mean, he's like an Erling Haaland regen, but he can play midfield for some reason. What a striker. He's the best player on their team, and they didn't even sign him. And honestly, the players that they did sign are pretty mid comparatively. Like Zaire-Emery, I don't think he's as good as Rodri. Rodri's still really good, even at 33. Shaquille Van Persie, good signing, but this Bailey Oswald guy is way better. Lucas Roman, I mean, is he as good as some of their other players? I don't think so. Davies is playing as an AML. I mean, he has that amazing pace. What a player. I just don't think they brought in Romeo Lavia. I don't know when they brought in Romeo Lavia, but he's not that good in game either. Again, their squad building just wasn't that good for me. And interestingly, they have an interim head coach again. Carlo Ancelotti was their head coach. So Craig Mudd left. They brought in Ancelotti. He did not do anything this year. And once again, they have Matt Wells was the one who won their Carabao Cup. Wow. What an interesting series of head coaches. Well, that is our look into the future. 5 seasons after we relegated Man City, they bounced back. They became one of the best clubs in England once again. However, they definitely didn't reach the heights of, pre-relegation. They're definitely not as good. The squad building wasn't as good. So they never won the Prem again. They never won a Champions League. They did win 3 Carabao Cups and an FA Cup, but they definitely weren't as good. I mean, it would have been fun to see them get relegated and be really bad afterwards, and instead of being up here, being down here. But again, relegation didn't systemically hurt them. It didn't hurt their reputation too much. It didn't destroy their finances. It didn't destroy their squad. But it hurt them just enough to make them not as good as they previously were. But if we ever wanted to really destroy Man City, we would definitely need to do it a little bit more systemically. We would need to destroy their finances, their reputation, and things like that. Because clearly relegating them just wasn't enough to completely destroy them, but it was fun to see them be not quite as good. But anyways, that is everything I've got for this football manager experiment. I hope you guys enjoyed the look into the future of what happened after we relegated Man City. But as always, thank you all for watching this video. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. And I hope you all are taking care of yourselves. I hope you all are doing well. And I will see you all in the next one. And if you want to see the original video where we actually relegated Man City and how that happened, I'll put that up on the screen now. But again, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.